Today we're going to sew a dress for Smart Dolls using a sewing pattern from My Little Doll Story. And you can find these sewing patterns for your Smart Doll on Etsy. So this pattern doesn't have a lot of pieces to it. And the suggested fabric is quilting fabric or something light, thin weight. So I'm using quilting fabric that is really thin. This is going to be my main fabric. And then for my lining fabric, I'm just going to use a plain white cotton. The first part is to prepare your straps. So what I do is I fold them in half and I press that down. And then I open it up again, and I'm going to press each side towards the fold I just created, towards the middle. Press that all the way down. And then when you're done with that first part, you're going to sew the second part to the middle. Like this, and press, and then you're going to fold that in half again. Once you've done that, you can take one end of the strap and press it down. And then refold it back the way it was. And you just have to do that to one end of the straps. And you're going to do that for all 4 of your fabric pieces. Once you've pressed your straps, what I realized is that when you fold it over in half again, you're going to have some fabric poking out. You see how that looks uneven? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut at an angle some of that extra fabric off so there's less bulk when I sew it, and so that it has a cleaner finish. So when I fold it again, this is a little fiddly to do. There's less fabric sticking out. I'm going to trim that a little bit more. So I did that to some of my other pieces. But now what we're going to do is we're going to fold from one end straight across and down the other, as close to the edge as possible. For this, I'm definitely going to use a piece of paper so that it doesn't get stuck under my feed dogs. Once you've completed your straps, we're going to go ahead and move on to the bodice. And this is the bodice pattern. And what I did here was I just snipped one side of the dart, and I'm going to mark the dart on the wrong side of my fabric. And I did that as well for the lining. So for my other side, I just made sure that the pattern was facing the other way. So now we're going to sew our straps to our bodice. I'm gonna pin the side of the strap that doesn't have that folded edge to my bodice. And this is the right side of my fabric. So I'm gonna pin it right there. And there. Also, when you're pinning, make sure that the nicer side of the bodice, of the strap is facing the center of the bodice. Yeah, so I had to switch mine around as well. So you're just going to pin that right there on both of them. Here's a close-up of how I have the straps pinned, and the folded edge is to the center of the bodice. Now what we're going to do is we're going to place our lining piece right side of the lining to the right side of the fabric, right on top of that. So pin that together and then sew it at 1/4 of an inch. So that's going to be the difference. Left side, you're going to sew down this side. Right side, you're only sewing from this end to that end. Now what we're going to do is we're going to trim our seam allowances right where we sewed the strap and the bodice and the lining. So don't cross your stitch, but do trim your seam allowances. This is going to reduce the bulk. So carefully reduce, cut that away. And you're going to do that for all 4 edges. Okay, that's one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew our darts, and we are sewing 4 separate darts. All right, so all of my those edges are trimmed, and we are going to fold. This is still the wrong side of my fabric. So what I'm gonna do, I'm going to match my chalk legs that I drew earlier, and I'm going to pin it and then sew my dart. And this is the lining. Be careful not to catch your strap in there. So if you marked your fabric, or if you didn't, you can do that now. And then go ahead and sew your dart in. So right now with it pinned, it should look something like this. Okay. Now that I've sewn in my darts, to reduce the bulk, I'm going to go ahead and just trim it. So trim all your threads. And what we're going to do now is we're going to flip the bodices over. Okay, we can also trim them afterwards. So this is what it's going to look like. I'm pushing out where the straps are. Just pull on that gently. Now that we've pressed out our bodices, give it one more press there. I'm going to trim off these little edges here and readjust my ironing so that the lining is fully in the back. So the back of your bodice, the lining portion, should now look like this. Both of your sides should be nice and smooth with the bust pushed into the right side of your fabric, or whichever one that is. But that's how it should look by now. Now here what I'm doing is I'm doing a test fit on my doll so that I know where I want to, how far I want to overlap these two front pieces for the bodice. And I think for me this works. All of my smart dolls have the smaller bust, so this is perfect placement right here. And it's starting to look really nice. So for me, this is where I'm going to pin it, and I'm going to baste it. All right, for the next few steps, we're going to just finish off the other seam. Remember, this one we had turned over. So finish up the other one. It was actually supposed to be finished on this side, but I messed up and did it on this side. But that's okay, because we're just going to flip some things around and we'll work with it. So after that, you want to finish up the bottom of your ruffle. This is the super long piece. It's like 40 inches long. Finish up the bottom of your ruffle and then press it to the wrong side. So this is the right side of my fabric. That's going to end up being your hem. When you're done with that, you're going to put some gathering stitches into the main part of your skirt, which is about 20 inches long. So to put in your gathering stitches, you're going to baste using your longest stitch length at the top of the skirt portion. At this point, if your skirt doesn't have like a directional pattern, you can use any side as the top. You're going to take the tails and lengthen them so you can have long tails to pull on afterwards. And you're just going to stitch across. Just going to stitch across. When you're done with that, you're also going to put in gathering stitches into the ruffle portion. Once you're done with the ruffle portion, you're going to gather it to fit the bottom of your skirt, which is 20 inches. Once you've completed your gathering, you're going to attach the right side of your ruffle to the right side of your skirt fabric. The bottom part, not the part that's already gathered. So what I'll do, I'll pin it on one end and then pin the other end. And in the middle, I'm going to work to loosen the gathered ruffle so that it fits the width of the skirt. So what I have here now is I've gone ahead and sewn the ruffle to the skirt. I serged and finished my edge, which you can do with the zigzag or with the serger. And then I pressed the serged seam allowance up towards the skirt. My next step will be to stitch the ruffle to its seam allowance, which is under here, and to the skirt. And then I will begin gathering the waistband. The waistband I'm going to gather to the width of my bodice from here to here. So I just gathered my skirt by pulling on the top two threads on the waistband. And now, with right sides together, so your bodice is going to be here. This is my right side of the bodice. And this is the right side of my skirt. I just flipped it over. And a good way to check is by checking whether your seam allowance is on the outside or where your seam allowance is. So here you can see I have the skirt pinned to the bodice. And on this side, because this side of the bodice was already finished nicely, I'm going to leave about 1/4 of an inch out. I'm going to baste this, and then this side I'm going to serge before I turn it up, or before I give it the permanent stitch, because what I'll end up doing is turning it over so that it has a nice finish when we're done and you won't see the serged edge. So I've basted this portion and I went ahead and finished this edge of my skirt. I serged it. Now, before I put the permanent stitch, I'm going to fold this over to match this part of the bodice so that it looks like that. So I'm going to fold it over. I'm going to pin it. And now I'm going to put a permanent stitch across the width of the bodice and the skirt. Now that we've inserted our permanent stitch across, I'm going to go ahead and press up the bodice with the seam allowance facing up towards the shoulders, and I'll put a permanent stitch at the very edge of this seam. So here we have the wrong side of the fabric. You can see my serged waistline. So I'm just going to press that part up before I stitch the seam allowance to the bodice. While I'm at it, I'm going to press this edge. So that now has a nice finished edge. And I'll repress my hem here. That'll be the last thing that we stitch, because we want to finish up the sides of our dress first. So this piece here. Now you can serge or zigzag this edge of the skirt, and then you will finish sewing the hem of your ruffle. Now I'm going to remove all the gathering stitches that are still visible with my seam ripper and clean up the threads on my dress and try it on my doll. Now to close up the dress, this is my skirt pattern piece. I'm including here my seam allowance of 1/4 inch for the waistline. This mark here is where you're going to sew from the bottom of the hem up to here. And then you're going to back stitch. And you can use 1/4 inch or a little bit more to sew that up. And then this part here, you're going to use like a sew and snap or Velcro or something like that to finish it up. But for now, I've sewn down that seam in the back. And now I'll sew a snap in. Alright guys, so here is the dress, and I've sewn up the back seam. I'm going to move her hair so you can see. So the back seam is sewn up part of the way. This also gives you space to put the stand so that you can stand her up. So there it is. And I put a seam here towards the top edge and a seam here at the bottom of the waist. So there's the dress. I think it's a great. So what do you think? Will you sew this up for your smart doll if you have one? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video.